Welcome to Eona-X demo. In the first part of this demo, we are going to take a look at the Eona-X data catalog. We're going to take a look at the identity and verifiable credential and how this is used in the context of Eona-X. We're also going to look at data access policy and contract between consumer and provider. Before we jump into this demo, let's take a look at the overall ecosystem. So at the bottom here, you see a list of data providers. Actually, all the entities that you see are founding members of Eona-X and are connected to the current Eona-X demonstrator environment. You see at the top that we have two data consumers, one called Seamless Travel and another one called US Travel. Those are demo consumers that we use right now to showcase Eona. And in the middle, you have the so-called federation platform. So that is the Eona-X environment, where the connection between data providers and data consumers is made possible without having to duplicate or copy the data within the Eona-X environment. Okay, so without further ado, let's take a look at the demo and Eona-X sandbox. So this is the login page for the Eona-X sandbox. Here I'm going to log in. As you see, we have a number of participants currently connected to Eona-X. I'm going to log in as Seamless Travel participant, the consumer we've seen at the top. When I log in to the Eona-X environment as Seamless Travel consumer, I land on the data catalog. And on this data catalog, you see that for now, we have different members of Eona-X which are providing different data assets. So namely, Group ADP is exposing in the catalog some terminal information as well as transit information in Charles de Gaulle. So information that explain how to go from your arrival point to your departing point in case of transit in Charles de Gaulle. Air France is exposing some flight schedule information. This is a real production data for all participants, by the way, but for Amadeus, where we are sharing data from a test airline whose code is 6X. So we are sharing some PNR, so booking data from this test airline, as well as some flight schedule information for this test airline. Aéroport Marseille-Provence is sharing data about arrival information in Marseille Airport. We'll see that later. Apidae, which is a tourism organization, is sharing some tourism data, like a list of restaurants at a specific destination or a list of activities. Renault Group is exposing some information about dealer where car rental is possible. And last but not least, SNCF is sharing some information about train schedule. And once again, it's a real production live data. If we look at the Seamless Travel participant and what the profile of this participant looks like in Eona-X, so that's what I do on clicking on this icon. You can see that this participant has a distributed identity server that can be targeted with a specific endpoint specified here, and that this identity server contains his self-description. So self-description is a key concept in the architecture of data spaces, and in this case, we can see that the Seamless Travel participant has a number of claims or attributes that are defined. One is registration number. This is a dummy number for this participant, but it also contains a headquarter address, which in this case is defined in D, so Germany, as well as a legal address, which is also specified in D. We can also see that this self-description is signed, so signed by a so-called trust anchor. In this case, we can see here so it's signed with a private public key mechanism. So this proves that this set of credentials have been verified and cannot be forged or changed, otherwise this will invalidate the signature. And last but not least, the self-description has also gone through a compliance API provided by GAIA-X, which effectively certifies that the format of this self-description is compliant with the expected format or as defined by GAIA-X architecture. So we've just seen that this participant has a headquarter defined in Germany. If we come back to the catalog, we are now going to look at the concept of data policy. So if I click on the Amadeus data set for 6x PNR, you will see that for this specific asset, alongside an example of the answer, there's a policy tab. And this policy contains, so it's a policy that was defined by the data provider, in this case Amadeus, and that defines an access constraint. So consumer, if I read what this policy says, it says that consumer who want to access this data set, 6x PNR, need to have a headquarter address, which is in the list that is specified here. So in layman's term, headquarter address of the consumer needs to be in Europe. We have seen just before that the seamless travel participant has a headquarter in Germany. That explains why this participant can see the 6x PNR asset from Amadeus. Just to illustrate, if we log out and log in, as you can imagine, as US travel, which as a name indicates, if we look at the profile of this participant, has a headquarter address defined in US. This US travel participant view of the catalog does not include or fill the 6x PNR that has a policy that doesn't match this participant is filtered out in its view of the catalog. So you cannot even see assets that are not accessible to him. So let's come back to our main consumer, which is seamless travel. We see that we have a number of assets actually which are highlighted in green. So those assets, if I wave on those assets, you will see that you have a message telling me that you have access to this asset until a certain time, in this case nearly a year time from now. Some other assets are not highlighted in green, and we will illustrate in a second how that works and why that is. For the purpose of demo, I'm going to switch to this web app, and this web app is what has been built on the theme of multimodal travel to show how data can be consumed to help an end traveler to bring back together a travel that would have been booked in different systems. So data spread around different systems. So I will create a new trip, as we talked about Lucy as our persona for this demo. And let's assume that Lucy has booked a 6x flight. So the Amadeus test airline going from London Heathrow to Charles de Gaulle, and let's say on the 27th of January. If we search, so that first search has gathered data. So the consumer, which is seamless travel in this case, has gathered data from Amadeus about the 6x schedule for this, schedules for this 6x airline. So let's assume that Lucy has booked on the 6x 1366. And here we go. We've added a first part to a trip on the 27th of January where data has been accessed through Eona-X and through the connector deployed for the seamless travel data consumer and Amadeus as data provider for this information. We're now going to add a connection, assuming that Lucy has booked a connection in Charles de Gaulle flying on Air France and going from Charles de Gaulle to Marseille on the same day. And when I click on search, you see that I get an error saying data not authorized. The reason why I get this is because, as explained before, seamless travel consumer has access to certain assets, but it doesn't have access to Air France KLM data. So when we click on Air France KLM data, this is what this request access button allows to do. It allows seamless travel consumer to make a request that will be sent to Air France within the Eona-X infrastructure, asking Air France authorization to access their flight data. So when I click on request access, this is going to initiate a background asynchronous conversation that will push to Air France who is making the request, in this case seamless travel, along with all credentials of the seamless travel, and Air France will be able to decide whether access will be granted or not. For the purpose of the demo, we haven't set up some complex rules, so by default access will be granted. So I click on request access now. It takes a few seconds and we see that the result is an access granted and that we have here a contract that has been created. So it's a very basic contract for now, but it explains the mechanics. In this contract, we have a contract start date, which is just now, a contract end date, which is, we see a validity of 10 minutes. So this is very short contract, but this allows us to repeat the demo when we need to. And you see that there's placeholder for other attributes in this contract that are not used for the purpose of this demo, but that could be filled by Air France. So expressing in the contract some like obligations or prohibitions on the usage of the data. So basically condition of use for this data. While I'm here connected to Eona-X as seamless travel, I will also request access to SNCF data so that I can then smoothly run the rest of the demo as well as APIDAE. Here we go. And last but not least, the Renault data. Okay, so now I have access to most of the data I'm going to use for the rest of the demo. So I'm going to switch back to this web app and simply relaunch the search. And I should now get access to Air France schedule. So that's what we have here. I will assume that Lucy booked on the late flight or like the 5:25, the Air France 7674. I'm going to add this segment to the travel book. It's going to take a few seconds. And I will explain in a second why it takes a bit of time. And last but not least, I will add to complete the trip, a return from Marseille back to Paris a few days later. Let's assume on the Sunday. I get access to SNCF schedules. You see there's quite a lot. We'll take a random one. And there we go. So what we have here is a multimodal travel book for Lucy that tracks with real-time information from different providers gathered through Eona-X, a fairly complex trip. So with at the top information coming from Amadeus on the first segment going from LHR to Charles de Gaulle. A second connection with Air France on going from Charles de Gaulle to Marseille, so a connection in Charles de Gaulle. We see that we have a total connection time of 2 hours and 55 minutes, but with also gathered as we built this trip information from ADP, from Paris Airport, on the actual time it takes to go from the arrival gate of the first flight to the departure gate of the connecting flight. So you see that we had this will require 44 minutes broken down into different steps that are described here. You also see that we've gathered information from Marseille province on arrival in Marseille. So we see that this flight arrives in Terminal 1 and that the baggage need to be collected at the baggage collection belt number 44. A connection a couple of days later with a SNCF train going back from Marseille to Paris. And we also display on this travel book information that comes from Renault, indicating at destination at a specific point where to go to rent a car through Renault dealers. So you see here it's centered around the arrival point, as well as information, for example, in Marseille coming from Apidae on list of restaurants near the arrival point, or list of activities near the arrival point. So as a conclusion, as seamless travel consumer connected to Eona-X through the control and safe access to data and the connections made by Eona-X, we've built this web app which is showcasing how we can easily gather access data from partners and build an application that regroups data from different systems in real time.